On today's Monday Night Travel, we're introduced to the pristine beaches and rainforests, as well as the diverse peoples of Fiji. We're joined by award-winning Moon Guidebook author Minal Hajratwala as she takes us on a journey through this South Pacific island nation, from the two largest islands of Viti Levu and Vanuatu to the myriad breathtaking chains that make up this must-see corner of the world. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. I'm Lisa Friend, and I'm delighted to be your host this evening as we explore the island nation of Fiji. So please join me in welcoming tonight award-winning guidebook author, Minal Hajratwala. Minal, welcome so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's an honor to be here.
I'm so excited. I didn't want to say this to you before, but I was the one who's like, we need to do a show on the South Pacific, and I've heard so many good things about Fiji, and so I arm wrestled some people into being the one who got to host this show. So I'm exceedingly excited that you're here with us tonight.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was thinking about your question about what makes Fiji unique, and there are many things, but one of them is that I think it's one of the few places in the world that Rick Steves has not been. So I hope I'll get to host you, you and him maybe there one day.
Oh, okay. I say yes. Speaking of guidebook authors, Rick Steves, how did you become a guidebook author to Fiji?
I think that travel is really in my genes, maybe in my family history. And I thought I would share some images just to share this part of the story. My great grandfather, who I think you can see here, is his name was Motiram. And in 1909, he left the west coast of India and traveled to Fiji as a tailor. And he set up a little tailoring shop. And he became kind of a guide and an interlocutor to help lots of members of his own family and also of his community come over to Fiji and built up his business and built up the community. And this is a picture of the family in the 1950s. So here in the center is my grandfather, his son, my grandmother. Here's my father as a young man, and all of my uncles, aunties, cousins. And they all lived in Fiji in the capital city of Suva. And they ran a department store. And so few generations of my father's family were there. And my mother's family also came over to Fiji. They were from the same area of India. And here's a picture of my mother as a serious young schoolgirl in her school uniform. So my mother was born and raised in Fiji. And I wrote about my family in my first book, which was called Leaving India, My Family's Journey from 5 Villages to 5 Continents. My family right now is all over the world, 9 different countries, and that book was about how it happened. And as I traveled the world for about a year, interviewing my family members, talking to them about their migration stories and how they ended up where they were, I realized that I wanted to go back to Fiji and spend more time there. And so I leapt at the chance to write the Moon Fiji travel guidebook, which gave me the opportunity to stay in Fiji for a while and to explore also parts of the country that I hadn't seen before when I was just on family visits. So that's how I came to write the guidebook.
That is wonderful. I loved that picture of your family, all of them just sitting there, and you had the little boy in front who was like crying and really unhappy, and he's sitting right next to probably his sister or his cousin who is just movie star gorgeous, and you just had the whole range of human emotions in that. Speaking of range, though, we should introduce our audience to Fiji. Do you have some more pictures for us, please, Minal?
Sure, yes. So just to get oriented, here's Fiji in the South Pacific. just somewhat north of New Zealand and east of Australia. And so it's an easy flight from the west coast of the United States, either from Los Angeles or San Francisco. You can get a direct 9-hour flight to Fiji. You could also break your journey if you wanted to, stopping in Hawaii or Tahiti on the way. And being in the South Pacific, it's of course very tropical. And amongst all of these island nations down here, Fiji is actually kind of prominent and a big fish in its pool. And we'll share a few kind of quick fun facts. I think they're fun. So Fiji's territory is 1.29 million square kilometers, but only 1.5% of that is land. So it's a lot of ocean and pox of land in between. There are 330 distinct islands, and out of those, about a third are inhabited. And the islands are surrounded by 33 separate barrier reefs. And these coral reefs are filled with 800 different species of coral, which is what led the oceanographer Jacques Cousteau to call Fiji the soft coral capital of the world. So it's a real treat for snorkelers, scuba divers, and even people who don't want to go in but want to ride in a glass bottom boat and just see what's down there. And the islands are home to 1 million-ish people. So across that whole big expanse, it's not a very congested or crowded place. Most of the population lives on the two main islands. And of that population, the majority are indigenous Fijians who are called Itauke in their language. And then a little over a third are of Indian ancestry, like myself and my family. And they were brought over during the time of the British Empire ruling over Fiji. And the best time to visit Fiji is June through October. For Westerners, it's a time when it's not quite as hot as it gets, although it's still warm, tropical, very never get a chill really. And it's a good time to also avoid the hurricane season. And the land in Fiji is mostly owned by the indigenous population, which makes Fiji really quite different from many other former colonies in the world. And it's quite beautiful that indigenous Fijians have retained the vast majority of the ownership of their land, and it's owned collectively by the tribes and the tribal chiefs. So it creates quite a distinct feeling to be in Fiji. Here's Hollywood versions of Fiji. So you might remember Tom Hanks in Castaway. There's an island called Castaway Island. And those of my generation might remember Brooke Shields in the Blue Lagoon. And this is the actual Castaway Island, which you can visit on a day trip. This is the actual Blue Lagoon, which is very gorgeous, and you can also visit that either on a day trip or if you're perhaps on a cruise or staying on a neighboring island. And there are frequent trips to this gorgeous lagoon. So the beaches are, of course, what we think of when we think of Fiji and visiting there and enjoying the time there. And there are two types of beaches, really, and it's important to know what you want. So there are the coral beaches of Fiji, and there are the white sand beaches. And this is a beautiful dance troupe called VOU, VOU, that does amazing shows. We'll see some of their videos perhaps later. But so the coral beaches are great for hanging out, snorkeling. If you're going to those areas, you would want reef shoes or water shoes because it can be a bit prickly, and it's good if you want to see things under the water. The white sand beaches are just nice for lounging and walking on the soft sands, and you don't see much if you're trying to snorkel from there. but there usually, if you stay in those kinds of areas, then your resort might offer you a boat trip to go snorkeling elsewhere nearby, to a reef. So let's just take a look at the map, and we can get a good overview. So the main island is here. It's called Viti Levu, and it's the big island of Fiji. And when you come in internationally, you'll land in the Nandi airport. And there are a couple of places to stay right around there. Most international flights come in around 4 a.m. or so. And so you end up usually spending a night or like sort of a day and a half in this area, just recovering from your jet lag and landing. There is an area called Denarau, which is a kind of artificially man-made island with a golf course, and it has the big resorts there. So people like to stay there for a night or two at least. Some people just stay there for their whole trip for an all-inclusive resort kind of experience. The city of Nandi is there and has a little backpacker beach area on one side. And then the Coral Coast is this whole area. This is really the first area in Fiji that was developed for tourism. So there are a lot of hotels, resorts, and accommodations of all kinds down in this area. And as the name implies, these are coral sand beaches. Viti Levu is mostly coral beaches. And then over here is the capital, which is Suva. And then for the white sand beaches, you want to go out to the smaller islands. So up here you have the Yasawa and Mamanuta island chains. And these archipelagos are full of small islands that often they just have 1, 2, maybe 3 resorts on them. So you have a kind of a private experience. Some of them are adults only. So if you don't want children running around you, you have some options out there. And others are very family oriented, and they have kids clubs and lots of kinds of activities so that kids can be entertained. And then down here are the islands of Benga and Kandavu, which are places that are really precious for divers. Beautiful shark populations down here, and very rich reefs, and they're not as traveled and perhaps trampled in some ways as some of the sites off of the main island. And then out here you have Fiji's second island, which is Vanua Levu, and there's a beautiful area there called Savu Savu. The Cousteau family started one of the first ecological resorts, eco-luxury kind of resorts in Fiji up there, and that resort, the Cousteau Resort, is still running. And so Savu Savu is a really nice area, lots of different kinds of accommodations, and you can go out and see where pearls are made and harvested and so on. And then over here we have Tavyuni, which is known as the Garden Island of Fiji. And Tavyuni has a lot of endemic species only found in Fiji, so it's a favorite of bird watchers, for instance. And there are beautiful waterfalls and hikes there, and also hikes within Viti Levu. These are all volcanic islands, dormant volcanoes, and so you have gorgeous mountains with craters that are now amazing, lush lakes and rainforest and waterfalls. And then out here you have the Lao group of islands, which is not really an area that tourists go to, but there are some cruises that go in that direction and take you for some very remote island experiences out there. So that's kind of the overview of Fiji and the land and the water.
Thank you, Minal. I just want to clarify, when you say cruises, do you mean like the big cruise lines like Holland America or etc., or do you mean
Mm.
like boats from Suva, the capital? Suva, did I say that right? Suva, the
Yes,
capital?
it is
Yeah.
Suva. Yeah, great question. There are both. The international cruise lines do come through Fiji, and they're usually part of a tour that it would include either some of the other islands of the South Pacific or perhaps en route to New Zealand or Australia. And that's kind of a triangle that sometimes people do, New Zealand, Australia, Fiji. Um, and then there are local cruises that you would book actually from Nandi, and they usually depart and they go up from Nandi, and they go up, either up the island chain on the west coast or kind of around. So both types of cruises are available, and those are smaller. Those are maybe 200 people or so on a boat or less. And there are also all kinds of other transportation. So there's a local ferry. There are catamaran type cruises where you can just go with a few people, and there are even helicopter rides for some of the more posh resorts have their own helicopter that whisks you away from the airport.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. I have never been in a helicopter, but okay. So you mentioned your slide mentioned 330 islands and all of this water, but that's a lot of salt water. But what about fresh water? You said rainforest. Is
Yes.
fresh water is the lack of fresh water an issue or?
It can be. The real distinction between the islands that are inhabited and the ones that are uninhabited is that the uninhabited ones don't have fresh water, so it's not really an option to live there. And so that is a big determiner. But Fiji is quite lush. It rains a little bit almost every day, year round, and there is also a rainier season. And so everything grows, and the mountains create these rivers, and so there's plenty of fresh water. In fact, there are some survivor type shows that have been filmed in Fiji, and I remember being on the island of Taveuni once, and the driver pointed out to me, "Oh, that's the mountain where they film it." And he said, "But it's kind of ridiculous. Like, we live in these mountains. There's fresh water, there's coconuts, there's pigs, there's papaya, it's not hard to survive."
So you gave me a clip that we can share with our viewers about water. So shall I show that now?
Yes, and then I'll talk about it a little bit.
Okay, good, because otherwise we were going to go off on a whole tangent about Survivor and alone and surviving off the land. So let's stick to the business.
Ndo sikalelai nongo tukai kwendo ko chui wai uto nongo tukai okwe ngone ndau tuko sikalela kusendo ko chui wai ngono lak ngali sisili tu ngono ndo lakar ndo lengoli na dhoka Meda manisa kali butungo sa lenga na butukai sa lengo ndo talitunga na ngono.
I love that combination of storytelling and symbolism. Is fishing still a big part of life for a lot of people in Fiji?
It is very much so, both river fishing and ocean fishing, and there are tour companies that will take tourists on fishing trips. And I'm not a fisher, but the people I've known who have gone on those come back very happy with their hauls and their photos. And usually then the guys on the boat will fry it up for you, and you get to eat what you catch. And for local people, I think the relationship between the creatures, the land, the water, and us is also very special, and it's something that is encompassed by the word mana, which has a lot of different translations, but I think of it as the spirit of the land, the spirit of the water. And so I find that for travelers, this is really an invitation to have an integrated experience, and not just as you're traveling in Fiji, you find that you don't just end up thinking about yourself. You think about the people whose land you're on, and you get to experience both the land and the water and the mountains and the oceans and the jungles. There's a small tour company called Rivers Fiji, which runs rafting trips through these gorgeous canyons, these gorgeous volcanic canyons on the Big Island, and that there's this long history of creatures and creativity and spirituality that's all very integrated in Fiji, and that creates a lot of elements to the experience beyond the beach resort. Although I love a good beach resort as well.
So will you mention that? I don't think we have that in our chat. So was it Rivers Fiji?
Yes, it's called Rivers Fiji.
Okay, I would never have imagined that there would be river rafting in Fiji, and that is just something I would be so happy to do, marrying my loves of water and tropical places, and that would just sounds fantastic.
Yes.
We were also talking before about village life, and you had a friend in a sort of documentary that you wanted to introduce.
Yes. So this is a glimpse of, I think, Fiji off the beaten path, and maybe we want to play the clip, and then it gives a real sense of how life is for Fijians, and what day-to-day life is in the villages.
All right, let me pull that up.
Awa susungi au tumbudake au mbula tiwa na koro numbutau tau. Nanga una sayada pa mai meu sala ki buli au sambita na koro au sala ki tuwe na koro ni papalangi membaleta na buli. Yana elongo itunga ena loma ni koro numbutau tau. Au nganreba tu meu lesu tale mai. Au mani lesu tale mai au sama imbula tungo na koro. Ya sapa tungo na mbula na koro na besinga. Yan ranga mai na mataglalai dua na lotu. Sa tiki busar na bakasanga, sianga na stovu, sianga na paramasi, bakasanga ngai na buka. Sa uti nga na bakasanga, na kai sanga, na tabioka nga na mbele, ka unga mene teitei, sianga na kai boli. Sa uti nga na bakasanga, sa roni ngole tambuka, le tabu tabioka, we revi taleani, te italiani na tabioka, kau tale meso, batu ya nambula mai na koro. Sianga nindo na nomu liu, sianga nindo elewana nomu thakaka, o lewa iko pakataki iko tunga, ena beisinga keve. Kwa ya tale tukina nambula na koro, saulailai na ka, sianga ni saumi lebu na ka, songa na kalalai nandaunga i saumi. Ia, totoka nambula na koro, ka soti ko na kena nrenre lalai. Ena matai, ninda uiado na tawimate. Na tawimate sianga na buniwai na koro, sianga na nasi, sianga na paliniwai. Entenda ulako baka ya sara imbukuya. Saumiti ko na kena ibondo ni lukeria vitu sanga bulnandola. Kene karua na nonda lenga na barasa na wai na sobu ko ya o sana ngole imba. Ona lako imba na kene sauni no mu lako endona rabitu sanga buluni o lako sombu endona rabitu sanga buluni o le sumai na kanga ona laki politaka na kanga o tebaka na yangona na China na ndalo na ubi na mileni na tomata kina pikala la italeso.
That was fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us, Minal.
Yeah, so this lady is from a village called Numbutautau, which is up in the highlands of the main island, and it's actually a historic village. It's the chiefly village of its region, and it was the last island to be taken by European colonialists in the 1870s, and some of the diaries of European visitors of that era talk about the paths leading to this village as being lined with sharp thorns and human skulls. You won't see that today, but this village is well known in Fiji because it's the place where a missionary in the 1860s and a couple of his fellows were killed by the tribal chief and his men and were eaten. And so it's part of Fiji's long history of cannibalism, which the tribes practiced in that era, and they would chop up their enemies and then put them into an earthen rock pit known as a lovo, which a lovo is just an earth oven, which even today you might be invited to a lovo feast with pig and potato and all that. But with this missionary, they cooked him in there and then they ate him and they consumed everything except they couldn't really get through his shoes. So those shoes are now on display in the Fiji Museum in the capital city. And so one story has it that the missionary's offense was that he touched the chief's hair, which was a big taboo. But more likely it was part of the kind of war over colonialism and the resistance of Fiji to the colonial, of Fijians to the colonial intrusions.
When did Fiji become independent?
Fiji became independent in the I should know the date, late 60s or early 70s, after about a less than a century of colonialism. And it actually, Fiji really resisted being settled for a long time. First of all, it was protected by those barrier reefs, which tended to ground ships. So, for instance, the HMS Bounty, famous for its mutiny, later tried to approach Fiji and couldn't get there and had to sail away. And then for the ferocity of the tribes, the warriors who really kept them out. And then it was a process where there were traders there. The Americans were there, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the British, and there were some disputes, some financial wrangling. And in order to get out of a debt that the Americans said that the Fijians owed them, Fiji actually went to the Queen and asked for Britain to take over and defend them. And so, because Fiji sort of voluntarily joined the British Empire, they were not exploited in the same kind of extractive way as many other places that were conquered, and so that's how the Fijians retained control of their land.
Wow, that's fascinating. You also mentioned hiking, hiking up to villages, not along paths with heads and thorns, but lovely, peaceful hiking.
Yes.
And we have a clip for that as well.
Yes.
And this clip doesn't have any sound because we wanted Minal to tell us about it.
Yes, so this clip and the previous video were very kindly provided to us by a company called Talanoa Treks, and they lead trips across the mountains of the main island through villages. And the company is a small tour company that is co-owned by the villages that it passes through. So they have trained local men and women as guides and as hosts. And when you travel with them, you stay in a village much like this, and you camp out with the village folks. There could also be some parts that start on the coast and then go up into the mountains, and you can see these amazing waterfalls, lakes, and get a real taste for local life. And some of their trips are sort of like put your cell phone in a bag because you won't really get reception out there. So so it's a nice way to unplug and experience a side of Fiji that actually not too many travelers get to do. and get to see. And in each village, you also experience a welcome ceremony, and as well as eating with the locals and helping prepare the food if you want, and so on. Fiji has a tradition where, in order to enter a village, you must ask permission and bring a gift. And so all of that is arranged by this tour company, and other places you'll go in Fiji. You'll also, if you go on a village visit, you'll be introduced to this kind of ceremony, where you will present the chief with a gift and then share kava with them. And we can talk more about kava at any time. This is a traditional Fijian two-hulled, double-hulled vessel with a particular shape of sail.
Oh, that is just gorgeous. I think we should, how do I say this, sensitively, like, is it really, is it comfortable to be invited into a village? Do you feel like you're exploiting anyone, or do you really feel like a guest?
No, it's very comfortable because they're the landowners. You know, as I mentioned, 87% of the land in Fiji is owned by the tribes collectively. So so each tribe has its area that it owns. And so every piece of land, even if you don't think you're going into a village like this, this watering hole, it's part of the territory of a tribe. And so you would want to ask permission just to enter and to pass through. And even the large resorts in Fiji, the big international chains, they are not owners of their land that the hotel is on. Most of them are on 99-year leases. So their lease with the local tribe is a contract that includes annual payment and so on. And it also includes an employment contract. So even if you're in a big hotel, most of the people, the staff that you encounter, they will be the landowners, and they are really genuinely welcoming you, not just to the chain hotel, but to their home and their land. So it's a very different feeling, actually, than other places. And there are plenty in the world where you go and you do feel, oh, these folks are being exploited. Of course, there's always some level of difference in economic and standard of living and all of that. But even so, I think in Fiji, there's a real genuine sense that you are being invited into people's homes.
Oh, that's wonderful. The next clip that we have, I am asking you very kindly to introduce because it is a very specific story.
Yes. So this clip is, and I should say this clip and the water clip were very kindly provided to us by the dance company VOU, VOU, which is a very beautiful contemporary dance company, and we'll see a longer dance version. But this is just a short clip of a piece of theirs that is about a particular myth on the island of Taveuni. And Taveuni is home, as I mentioned, to many specific species that you don't find anywhere else in the world, including this particular red flower, which has a very beautiful myth behind it of a young woman. In some versions, she's a princess of her tribe, and she falls in love with a young man, and their love is forbidden. And so they're forced to part. And she is on the mountaintop weeping, and her tears turn into these red flowers. And so that's the story that this little clip is showing.
Oh, let's look at that then.
So that is the story of the flower, which is known in Fiji as Tangimusia. And in order to see it, you climb a particular volcanic path, and it's quite strenuous of a hike. And toward the top, if you are lucky and if it's the right season, then you would see that red flower. And on the way, what you would see are some amazing and very unique birds and other kinds of plant species that are not found anywhere else in the world. And also on Tavyuni, there are sets of corals and even fish that are very local to that site, that area. And in in fact, there are species that are still being discovered. So Conservation International recently did an expedition, and I think they found 5 new species of fish in the waters around Tavyuni and a little further out in the Fijian waters.
Wow, that is so cool. How can a visitor engage in meaningful cultural exchange? How do we
Yeah.
how do we dive into the culture?
I feel like there are 2 ways in Fiji. One is just talking to people. People are very friendly in Fiji and will happily tell you stories. I have heard over and over of people kind of striking up a conversation and then being invited to their taxi driver's home for a meal or something like that. So it's not hard to make friends in Fiji. Um, and then the other is to really look for locally owned and operated companies and enterprises. And there are a few that I've found to be really lovely and genuine in creating cultural experiences for tourists that are not touristy and that are not merely kind of performative, but that actually are a two-way exchange. So one is VOU, the dance company, VOU. They have a hub for arts and culture and activities, and they hold lots of different kinds of events in their center in Nandi. Another is the trekking company, Talanoa Treks. Um, and then there is if you want the experience of staying in a Fijian village without necessarily the whole trekking, hiking experience, there's a beautiful retreat center called Namosi, Namosi, Unplug Adventures, and they are up in the hills, about an hour up the mountain, and their village has traditional Fijian bures, and bures are those thatch roof bungalow type structures. And so what they've done is next to their own village, they've set up a row of those bures for tourists with comfortable mattresses that are thick for our bodies and all of that. And they have a kind of loose schedule of activities that you can do, like go on a little raft that is the local type of raft on the little river that is nearby, or harvest the vegetables, or and you can also just hang out in the village and and lounge around and be fed, but you can also participate, and that's what I love about that location. And then there's another organization called Rise Beyond the Reef, and they have a store near Nandi, and their wares are found throughout Nandi. And what they do is that they um, work with craftswomen in the villages, particularly the villages that are not the coastal villages that really get all the tourism, but the inland or outer island villages where they're creating a livelihood by making products. And so shopping is always fun, and you can order from them even here. And when you're in Fiji, you can go to their store and workshop and see how some of these really beautiful traditional crafts are made, including the fabrics, and a lot is made from pounded leaves, pounded palm leaves, as well as tree bark. So those are some places, and then there are other things you can do in Fiji, like go to a church service on Sundays. Most Fijian churches have a choir and a very beautiful service. So I think about, who are you? What do you love? What do you like to do? And then think about, like, who's your counterpart in Fiji? Like, when I go to Fiji, I want to find out who are the poets and who's doing a poetry reading. And usually that's in the capital, and there are a couple of things going on. There are sports that are played every weekend. Soccer, cricket, and rugby is particularly popular. Fiji won the Olympic gold for the men's team in the 2016 Rio Games. So they're very proud of their rugby, and it's a national passion. And you can always go to a match and make instant friends by cheering for the local team. And yeah, so lots of ways to connect in Fiji, I think.
So when you spoke about the traditional crafts work of clothing from bark, I think we're going to see that in our last clip, because we're going to do a little clip about Fijian dance. Is that right?
Yes. And this is one more, the last one from Vu.
That clip could have gone on a little bit longer. I enjoyed it so much. So
Yes.
we've talked about a lot of different things, but I just have a couple of things. Going back to the villages, are there cultural no-nos that we should know about as
Yes.
visitors?
There are. The main one is kind of what I mentioned, which is you just never would enter a village without permission. It's not like a neighborhood where you can just wander around. And the ways to do that are, one is, do go if there is one with an organized trip from your hotel or your interpreter. They've set up times when the village is ready and has chosen to welcome visitors. So those are good times to go. And if you somehow find yourself alone and you're near a village, you can always just ask somebody if it would be okay for you to come and greet the chief and bring him a gift, and then see what kind of answer you get. Definitely, though, Sundays and Christian holidays are private times, so most villages do not want visitors at those times. And then the other thing is, when you're interacting in that formal village setting, just to follow the guidelines of your interpreter or your guide, and do the things that they tell you. So there are some rules around, like, if the chief is sitting, you wouldn't stand in his presence, for instance. Those kinds of things, which your guides will tell you. And I thought I would talk a little bit about the kava ceremony. So kava, as folks may know, is the ground powder of a root that, when pounded and mixed with water, it becomes a drink, and the drink has a kind of mildly hallucinogenic quality. So it's a social drink. So typically, what would happen in a kava ceremony is that the chief and his men would be making the kava in front of you, and then they would pass around a bowl. And I have a mini bowl, so the one that they make it in is this shape, but much bigger, obviously, to hold enough for everybody. This is just a little souvenir replica. And then there's another little cup that they pass around for you to drink from. And so, don't take the drink and gulp it. Take a sip and pass it around. That's the protocol.
I'm sorry. Chug, chug, chug. Um,
Yes, it's not
so
your fault.
that's something that would be social, like just passing around a, I don't know, around a campfire, you might pass around a bottle of
Yes,
peach or
exactly.
whatever.
And in the ceremonial context, it's formal, but also people drink kava casually and socially as well. So, for instance, if you're on a cruise boat, then it's likely that at some point the crew will be having their own kava, and maybe they'll invite some of the guests to join them and enjoy it with them as well.
So there was a question, but so I think we're ready to get to the question and answer session
Great.
after we do a word from our sponsor. So Monday Night Travel viewers, I'm so glad that you're here. Our word from our sponsor this week is a special exclusive sneak info, a scoop, if you will. We are rolling out our 2025 tour dates right now. So they'll be on the website by the end of the week, but there are some trickling out there. So 2025 is ready to go. And that's important for you to know because next week on Monday Night Travel, we're having our first Destination Duel Tour Edition. So the best of Germany in 13 days is going to go head to head with Munich, Salzburg, and Vienna in 8 days. And remember that you, the audience, we need you to come and participate because you'll vote in 4 categories and then in an overall choice, and you will crown the winner. So we hope that you will see us next week for Monday Night Travel. Question. So the first one we have is actually from a staff member who the Monday Night Travel community knows and loves. Julianne has taken up surfing in the last few years, and she wanted to know if there was surfing in Fiji.
Yes, there is great surfing in Fiji. In fact, I think I can share. Let's see, maybe my sharing is not as smooth as it was, but this is a picture of Cloud Break, which is Fiji's most famous wave. And this site regularly gets up to around 10 feet swells. But I was just looking and I saw that Sports Illustrated's website says that just last month it had 20-foot swells. So this is a kind of pro site and they have competitions there and so on. And then there are also plenty of sites to learn that are a little more protected and a little safer for beginners. So there are surf schools and surf trips in Fiji for sure.
Little easier for some people. So you mentioned near, not that far away from the airport, was a backpacker beach. So I have 2 questions for that. One, what makes it a backpacker beach? And
Yes.
2, are there places on the other islands where you would have maybe small pensions or where it would be a little bit more down to earth than big resorts?
I'll say what makes it a backpacker beach is that the accommodations are not as luxurious. They're not big hotels, and they are designed for people who don't need a ton of amenities and are happy to stay maybe without air conditioning or those kinds of things. And that area is right on the beach. There are a couple of other areas. One area that I mentioned called Savu Savu on the second island has some accommodations like that. And in Suva, the capital, you can find more affordable places. Overall, though, I would say that Fiji is not really a budget destination. First of all, it costs a certain amount of money to get there, and then secondly, it's I think the way that people find places and so on, it's a little more, if you're a backpacker or you're kind of looking for the budget accommodation, you'd probably want to set up your first night or two from here and then see, and then kind of go place by place. And it's definitely possible to do, especially on the main island, because there are lots of buses. Somebody I saw in the question answer asked how to get from Nandi to Suva. So there's lots of ways. There's a local bus that's really quite cheap, and then there's a kind of coach where you have, a more comfortable seat and air condition, and that's very mid-range. And then you can also hire a car driver and rent that for a day, and that's also fairly affordable. But many of the accommodations are what makes it in the more expensive range.
Okay. Gary visited Fiji in 1976 when you were a wee baby, and he would like to know how it has changed over the years.
Well, it's changed a lot, like the rest of the world. I also visited in 1976. I was 5. The only thing I remember from that trip is that I got a fishbone stuck in my foot
Oh,
at my uncle's house. um, I think Fiji has changed a lot. There have been one of the biggest changes is demographic. So, starting in 1987, there have been a series of military coups and ethnic tensions being exacerbated between the Indian and the indigenous Fijian population. And as a result of that, there have been mass migrations out of Fiji by the Indians, and so at one point, the population of Fiji was about 50-50, and now it's more what you saw, that it's more indigenous folks than Indians. I don't think that that's a thing that necessarily affects, someone traveling through Fiji. Obviously, there are other differences in terms of technology and all of those things that have changed the world. Fiji is quite easy to navigate as a tourist because the majority of the population does receive an education in English. If you go deep into the villages, maybe you would encounter people who don't speak English. But in the cities and in the tourist areas and on the coasts, almost everybody you meet would know English as their first language, if or their second, like their close second language. Um, and another difference over the years is that at one time it really was that most indigenous Fijians lived in their own villages and didn't you didn't necessarily see a real mix of people in the outer areas. And now that has shifted. And so, as with other places in the world, a lot of the rural populations have become urban populations as well. So that is interesting to see that uh, you see and encounter the indigenous populations everywhere, and and then also tourism has boomed. I think probably in the 70s it was much more off the map, and it was a rare traveler who ended up in Fiji, and a very adventurous traveler, and now it's a real destination, and uh, you see Americans, but also lots of Australians and New Zealanders travel there regularly on holidays, and for them it's a short hop, and they get package deals, and so if there's school holidays in Australia and New Zealand, become very packed times in Fiji.
oh, how would we find that out? Would that be
Um,
during the June through October time that you mentioned earlier?
some of them might be, but you will know because things will be booked up, and you'll be like, "Why is this one random week so expensive?" And that's why.
Okay. I think we need to clarify something. What makes a good gift for the chief?
Ah, yes, and I also wanted to clarify that cannibalism is long in the past. The That it no longer exists in Fiji. It was anyway always a very small thing. What you will find in Fiji is, along with the places that sell these, you would also find little replicas of cannibal weapons in all sizes, and cannibal forks and so on. So it's really a kind of at this point kind of a gimmick. And the particular village where Thomas Baker was killed has also apologized formally and repented and had a whole reparations ceremony with the church. Most indigenous Fijians are now Christian, and quite devout, and consider that to be just a small part of their past. And the question that you asked was what? Now I lost.
What makes a good gift for a chief?
Oh, a good gift. So, so again, your guide will sort of tell you about it, but the traditional gift is that you take a bundle of kava roots, and those are found at any local market, farmers market, etc. But if you're staying in a hotel, then you just, would give some money and then the guide would take it. But that's the traditional gift.
You don't need to worry about bringing chucker cherries and applets and cutlets from
Not at
Washington.
all. Not at all. There are some folks who like to bring gifts for the children of the village. So, school books, toys, candies, that kind of thing. But not required.
But that would be okay, or
Yeah, that's a pretty typical kind of thing that particularly the folks that are coming from Australia and New Zealand, and they, are closer by, and they just pick up some things on the way.
okay. We have time for two last questions. Do you know why your great grandfather chose Fiji?
Yes, he had another relative who had gone there, and Fiji was opening up at that time to Indian migration because the British had just taken possession, I suppose, of the islands, and they wanted to turn it into a cash producer and to grow sugar. And so they wanted to create these sugar plantations. So in Fiji and other places around the world, in order to staff their sugar plantations, it wasn't that they wanted to actually go work and cut cane. So they imported workers under indenture contracts from India, and those contracts were themselves a replacement for slavery. So the sequence of events was, globally, this is that first there was slavery, and then slavery was outlawed in the British Empire, and the British needed workers. And they noticed that in one of their possessions, which was India, there were lots of people who were very poor and had no work, and so they in some cases informed, but in many cases tricked large groups of workers to migrate to places that they had never heard of, and under these contracts, which said that you will work there for 5 years or 10 years, and your compensation will be the cost of this ship voyage. And so that was the first wave of Indians who came to Fiji. And then my family were of the kind of trading and merchant class, and they went over to provide services both to the other Indian workers and to the British who were there. So in my great grandfather's case, it was tailoring, and his clients were mostly British, but others in our community also did other kinds of work that served the local populations.
I imagine there's more information about that in your book.
There is, yes. So the
Plug it, Minal, plug it.
Plug it. Okay, that was a cue for me. So the first book is called Leaving India: My Family's Journey from 5 Villages to 5 Continents, and it is really the story of how people in my family migrated, as examples of the various waves of migration out of India over the last 100 years. So the first wave was that wave that went via the British Empire to the other places that the British owned, including Fiji, Trinidad, other places like that. And then there were subsequent waves, including the wave that that brought my family to my parents to the United States, which was the kind of educated class being recruited by the United States in the Cold War era. So a few different kinds of waves of migration. And so if you want to read the full story, that's in that book. But the Moon Fiji guide, what I love about Moon guides is that they also include a very substantial background kind of section. So there's a good overview of the whole story there as well.
So last question, I hope it's a pretty easy one. For someone's first trip to Fiji, roughly what would be the right amount of time to spend there?
I think that the sweet spot is about 2 weeks. You could do it in a week. You could in a week you could kind of hit two places, and you could get a sense of the beach and the mountains, or the main island and a small island. But in 2 weeks you could relax in those places and experience a few different kinds of activities. Depends what kind of traveler you are, but I'm the kind of person who, if I'm doing something vigorous, like say a rafting trip one day, then I want to have the next day to lounge around in a hammock and drink out of a coconut.
I think we would travel very well together.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Minal, for being with us tonight. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, and now I want to go to Fiji. So
yes, let's all go to Fiji. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks so much to the Monday Night Travel team. It's been a joy working with you all, and I really welcome readers to be in touch. And everyone's always got more questions, so please feel free to connect.
And we've got your website in the chat, and that will be in the follow-up email that comes out in 24 hours. Thanks, everyone.